The air was thin and cold, sharp with the scent of pine and crushed frost. It clung to the bare skin of my arms, a stark contrast to the fire of anticipation burning in my veins. Above, the moon hung like a polished silver coin, a silent witness to the ritual that would define not just my life, but the destiny of the Velcrin pack. Tonight I was to be claimed. Tonight the prophecy would be fulfilled. My name, Arden, was a whisper on the wind, a promise spoken by the elders since my birth. I was the one foretold, the Luna meant to stand beside the Alpha King. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat echoing the primal energy thrumming through the clearing. The pack was a wall of shadow and shimmering eyes around me, their collective breath a low growl of expectation. They watched me, the chosen one, standing on the cold, flat surface of the claiming stone. Shame and hope warred within me, shame for the weakness of my wolf, a pale flicker where a flame should be, and hope that the king's mark would finally ignite it, making me whole, making me worthy. King Darius Velcrin had not yet shown himself, but his presence was a storm gathering on the horizon. The very air grew heavy, charged with an ancient, untamed power that was his alone. He was a myth, a king forged in blood and shadow, and tonight his soul was meant to bind with mine. But as the High Elder raised his hands to begin the invocation, a cold dread, slick and oily, slithered up my spine. It was a feeling deeper than doubt, a premonition that whispered of an ending before the beginning had even truly begun. The High Elder's voice, rough as ancient bark, silenced the forest. On this night of the sovereign moon, we gather to witness the sacred bond. The prophecy spoken by the first Luna foretold a queen to unite the fractured packs, to soothe the rage of the scarred king. Let Arden Velcorin step forward and accept her destiny. My feet, numb with cold, obeyed. I walked to the center of the stone, my simple white ceremonial gown fluttering around my ankles like a shroud. The weight of 1,000 pairs of eyes pressed down on me, judging, waiting. I lifted my chin, forcing a fragile mask of serenity onto my face, my gaze fixed on the dark archway of pines from which the king would emerge. My entire life had been a path leading to this single moment. Every lesson in pack law, every lonely night spent memorizing the lineage of the alphas, every prayer whispered to the moon goddess for strength. It all culminated here. A tremor ran through the earth, a low thrum of power that had nothing to do with the pack, and everything to do with the one who commanded them. The whispers died. The shifting bodies froze. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. A scent rolled into the clearing first, ozone, damp earth after a lightning strike, and the raw, untamed musk of a predator that had never known a cage. Then he appeared. Darius Velcorin was not a man. He was a monument carved from granite and fury, taller than any wolf in his pack, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of his crown and his curse. He wore no finery, only simple black leather that clung to a physique honed by 1,000 battles. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down across his eye to the hard line of his jaw, a silver river of old pain that only made the fierce, obsidian darkness of his eyes more profound. He moved with a predator's lethal grace, each step silent, deliberate, consuming the ground between us. The pack bowed their heads as one, a wave of submission rippling through the crowd. I did not bow. I was to be his equal. I met his gaze, and the world fell away. There was no pack, no moon, no cold. There was only the endless, starless night in his eyes, a void that promised either salvation or utter annihilation. He stopped a mere arm's length from me, his shadow falling over me like a sentence. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The raw power emanating from him was a language all its own, speaking of dominance, of sorrow, of a rage banked so deep it could burn the world to ash. My pulse throbbed in my neck, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of pine. This was it. The moment of binding. He would reach for me, his fangs would graze my throat, and the mark, the sacred silver mark of the Alpha King. would sear itself into my skin, into my very soul, binding us for eternity. I tilted my head, an instinctual gesture of offering, of submission, of trust. My skin tingled in anticipation of the burn, but he didn't move. His gaze wasn't on the curve of my neck. It had lifted, looking past me, into the crowd. A flicker of something, confusion, recognition, crossed his stoic features before it was gone, shuddered away behind his impenetrable mask. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, ripped through the clearing. It was not a sound of awe, but of shock, of sacrilege. Slowly, as if in a nightmare, I turned my head. A figure was emerging from the throng of wolves, parting the sea of dark fur and stunned faces. The moonlight caught her, bathing her in an ethereal glow that made the silver embroidery on her gown shimmer like starlight. Her raven hair was a perfect cascade down her back, her face a mask of tragic, beautiful innocence. It was Leandra, my sister. My heart stopped. What was she doing? She was meant to be standing with our family, a witness, a supporter. Her place was not here, not in the sacred circle. She glided forward, her steps as silent as the king's, until she stood beside me on the claiming stone. The cold from the granite seeped into my bones, a deathly chill. "Leandra," I breathed, my voice a broken whisper. She didn't look at me. Her eyes, the same deep brown as my own, were fixed on the king. A single perfect tear traced a path down her cheek, a masterpiece of feigned sorrow. And then she tilted her head. There, on the pale, perfect skin of her neck, just below her ear, it burned. It was not a fresh mark, red and angry. This was a mark that had already settled, a swirling, intricate knot of silver that pulsed with a soft, internal light. It was a brand of moonlight and magic, a living signature of power. It was the Alpha King's mark. The world went silent. The roaring in my ears was the only sound, the rushing of my own blood in panicked retreat. It couldn't be. It was impossible. The mating bond was a sacred rite, performed before the pack, sealed by the moon. It was not something done in secret, in shadow. The prophecy named me. The elders had read the signs. My life had been shaped by this one singular truth. The whispers started then, a venomous hiss that spread like wildfire. 2 sisters, an omen. The bond is cursed. She bears the mark, the other is nothing, nothing. The word struck me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I was nothing, a hollow vessel for a prophecy that had never been mine. I looked from the glowing silver scar on my sister's neck to the impassive carved face of the king. His eyes were on Leandra, and in their depths I saw the first flicker of emotion I had ever witnessed from him. A possessive, territorial darkness that was as definitive as a slammed door. He had chosen her, or the bond had chosen for him. The how and the why didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the searing, public humiliation that was peeling my soul raw. I was a sham, a lie presented to the entire world. "Darius?" Leandra's voice was a melodic plea, laced with a strength I'd never heard from her before. "Tell them, tell her." He finally looked at me. The dispassionate cold in his gaze was more painful than any physical strike. There was no apology, no explanation. There was only a quiet, absolute finality. He was the king. His actions were law. His bond was truth. My prophecy was dust. "The bond has spoken," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone, through my very bones. It was the first time he had ever spoken to me, and the words were my execution. He didn't need to say anything more. He turned his back on me, on my shattered hopes, on the prophecy, on my entire existence. He took a step toward Leandra, his large hand gently cupping the back of her head, his thumb stroking the edge of the mark he had given her. It was a gesture of ownership, of claiming, in front of everyone, in front of me, the pack, which seconds before had been looking at me with reverence, now stared with a mixture of pity, scorn, and fear. I was an anomaly, a bad omen, a rejected mate standing on the sacred stone like a ghost at a feast. The warmth of the pack bond, which had always been a comforting hum at the edge of my senses, was gone. In its place was a cold, stark isolation. I was utterly, completely alone. My vision blurred. The torchlight swam, the silver moon fractured into 1,000 glittering shards. I saw my sister's face, her eyes meeting mine over the king's shoulder, and in them, beneath the shimmering tears, I saw it. Not regret, not sorrow, triumph, a cold, hard, reptilian triumph. In that instant, I knew. This was no accident of fate, no mistake of the moon goddess. This was a betrayal, calculated and cruel, executed with the precision of a hunting knife to the heart. The hand I had held for comfort, as I dressed for the ceremony, had been holding the dagger that would end me. My world did not end in fire and fury. It ended in the cold silver light of a scar on my sister's skin. Time fractured. The moment stretched into an eternity of silent, suffocating judgment. My feet were fused to the claiming stone, the glacial cold of it a mirror to the ice encasing my heart. The world was a blur of wavering torchlight and the pale, accusatory disk of the moon. I could feel the pack's collective gaze like 1,000 tiny needles piercing my skin. I was no longer Arden, the prophesied. I was a broken thing, a flaw in the grand design, left exposed for all to see. My first coherent thought was not of sorrow, but of a searing, white-hot rage that threatened to choke me. It was a foreign feeling. My life had been one of quiet obedience, of gentle hope, but the sight of Lyandra's triumphant smirk, now hidden behind a mask of delicate concern as she leaned into the king's formidable shadow, ignited something dormant within me. My weak, flickering wolf, which had spent a lifetime cowering, stirred with a snarl. It was a pathetic sound, a kitten's hiss against a hurricane, but it was mine. Slowly, deliberately, I forced my feet to move. Each step off the stone was a fissure cracking through the foundations of my life. The gown, once a symbol of my sacred destiny, now felt like a pauper's rags, clinging to me with the damp chill of disgrace. I kept my head high, my spine rigid, even as I felt my soul collapsing inward. I would not give them the satisfaction of my tears. I would not crumble before her. The whispers followed me, a physical force pushing against my back. Cursed blood. A barren vessel, the king's bond knew. What do we do with her? An unmated prophecy is a bad omen. The words were stones, each one finding its mark. I focused on the path ahead, a narrow channel through the sea of wolves. They parted from me not out of respect, but out of fear and disgust, as if I carried a plague. I saw the faces of she-wolves I had grown up with. Their expressions now shuddered, their eyes sliding away from mine. There was no comfort here, no solidarity. The pack was a singular entity, and its heart now beat for Lyandra. I was an excised part, left to wither. Then she was in front of me, blocking my path. Lyandra. Her hand, so delicate and smooth, reached for mine. I flinched back as if from a hot iron. "Ardyn," she breathed, her voice thick with false sympathy. "Sister, I never wanted this. The bond, it just happened. It chose me. Please, you must understand." I stared at her, at the perfect, sorrowful mask she wore. I saw the lie in the slight tremble of her lip, the calculated moisture in her eyes. I remembered countless nights she'd sworn her loyalty, her belief in my destiny. She had brushed my hair this very evening, her fingers weaving promises of a glorious future into the braids. "You will be the greatest Luna the Velkarin have ever known," she had whispered, her reflection smiling at me in the polished silver mirror. It was all a lie, a long, patient, venomous lie. My own voice was a prisoner in my throat, a familiar silence that had always been a source of shame, but now felt like a tactical disadvantage. I could not scream the accusations clawing their way up my esophagus. I could not expose her for the viper she was. All I could do was stare, letting the fury in my eyes speak for me. King Darius moved to stand beside her, a mountain of silent power. His proximity was overwhelming. The air crackled, and the scent of ozone and storms intensified, mingling with Lyandra's cloying, sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine. He looked down at me, and his face was unreadable, carved from stone, but his obsidian eyes held a flicker of something that wasn't cold indifference. It was annoyance, an irritation, as if my very presence was a discordant note in his symphony of power. "Enough," he commanded. The word was not loud, but it cut through the whispers and the tension like a blade, silencing the entire clearing. He was not speaking to Lyandra or to the pack. He was speaking to me. He took a step closer, and my wolf recoiled, yet my body stood frozen. His gaze dropped from my eyes to the hollow of my throat, to the unmarked bare skin where his claim was meant to be. A strange primal instinct flared within me, a desperate, humiliated urge to cover myself. "There is no prophecy here," he stated, his voice a low vibration that I felt in my teeth. "There is only the bond, my bond." He placed a possessive hand on Lyandra's shoulder, drawing her tighter against his side. She melted into him, a perfect picture of the destined mate. But even as he held her, his senses were locked on me. I could feel it. His gaze was a physical touch, tracing the lines of my face, the curve of my shoulder. His nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. He smelled my distress, my rage, my despair, and it did not please him. A low, barely audible growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of profound conflict. It was as if my pain was an irritant, a scent that was both repellent and inexplicably compelling to him. This was the truest agony, not just the rejection, but this ghostly echo of a connection, a phantom limb of a bond that the prophecy had promised but his mark had denied. He felt something, and he hated it. He hated me for making him feel it. Elder Theron, his face a grim mask of duty, finally pushed his way through the stunned silence. His ancient eyes, usually filled with a wise calm, were now troubled, darting from the mark on Lyandra's neck to my own pale, empty skin. "Alpha King," he began, his voice raspy. "The rites are desecrated. The prophecy named Ardyn. 2 sisters, 1 destiny. This is an imbalance. The pack feels it. The spirits are unsettled." Darius's gaze remained on me, hard and unyielding. "The spirits do not command my soul. The bond does. Lyandra is my Luna. The matter is settled." "But what of her?" Theron pressed, gesturing toward me with a trembling, age-spotted hand. "She was raised for the throne. She is the vessel of the first Luna's words. Her presence here, unmarked and unclaimed, is a wound in the heart of this pack." A decision had to be made. I was a loose thread that had to be cut or woven back in, and both options were impossible. I braced myself, waiting for the sentence. Exile? Imprisonment? Death? In that moment, any would have been a mercy compared to standing here, being dissected by 1,000 pairs of eyes. "She will be sequestered," Darius declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. He finally tore his eyes from me and addressed the elder, but I felt the release of his focus like a physical severing. "Take her to the Widow's Tower in the northern wing. She will remain there until I decide her fate. She is not to be seen or spoken to. She is an echo, nothing more. An echo, a ghost, a non-entity. He had stripped me of my name, my future, and now my very existence." The guards moved in, their faces grim and averted. They did not touch me with malice, but with a detached duty that was somehow worse. Their hands on my arms were cold, impersonal. As they began to lead me away from the clearing, from the life I was supposed to have, I risked one last look back. Lyandra was nestled against the king, her head resting on his chest. She was looking at me, and the mask of sorrow was gone, replaced once more by that cold, sharp glint of victory. She had won. She had everything. But it was the king who held my gaze. He stood with his chosen mate in his arms, the Alpha King in his moment of triumph, yet his eyes were fixed on me as I was led away like a criminal. The annoyance was still there, But beneath it, a storm was brewing. A dark, visceral conflict was warring in the depths of his soul, a battle I could not comprehend. As the distance between us grew, his expression hardened, his jaw tightening as if he were fighting against an invisible chain, denying some instinct that my retreating form provoked in him. He gave a minute, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent, furious denial aimed not at me, but at himself. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that while he had marked my sister, he was not finished with me. The prophecy had been broken, but its shadow still lingered, long and dark, and it bound the three of us together in a new, terrifying trinity of destiny, betrayal, and war. The widow's tower was a needle of cold stone, piercing a perpetually gray sky. It was the place where past Lunas had mourned their mates, a place of honorable sorrow. For me, it was a prison. The singular room at its peak was circular, its walls unadorned stone that wept with a constant, silent dampness. A narrow bed, a rough-hewn table, and a single high window that looked out not upon the kingdom, but upon the desolate, jagged peaks of the northern mountains were my only companions. They had taken my ceremonial gown and left me a simple gray wool shift, the color of ash, the texture of penance. Days bled into one another, measured only by the meager tray of food left outside my locked door by a silent guard. Loneliness was a physical entity in the room, a cold presence that sat on my chest and made each breath a conscious effort. The silence was the worst part. Stripped of the constant low hum of the pack bond, the world felt empty, dead. I was an island, and the sea that surrounded me was a vast, crushing nothingness. My wolf, already a timid flame, had retreated so far within me that I could barely feel its presence. It was a dying ember, starved of the connection it needed to survive. Shame was my shadow. The memory of that night played over and over in my mind. The silver glow of Lyandra's mark, the cold finality in the king's voice, the pack turning their backs. Each time, the humiliation was as sharp and fresh as the first. I traced the lines of the prophecy on the dusty floor with my finger, words I had known since birth, words that were now a cruel mockery. A daughter of Velkarin, born under the winter moon, shall soothe the rage of the scarred king and unite the packs under one banner. Her spirit, a gentle north wind, shall temper his storm. Was it me? Had it ever been me? Or was I just a placeholder, a decoy for my sister's ambition? The questions gnawed at me, relentless and unanswerable. I dissected every memory of Lyandra, searching for the signs I had missed. Her subtle questions about the king's temperament, her sudden interest in ancient bonding rituals, the way she had begun to wear scents, night jasmine and moonflower, known to be alluring to alpha bloodlines. I had seen it all as loving sisterly support. I had been a fool, a blind, trusting fool. One evening, as a sliver of moon hung in the dark sky outside my window, I heard something that broke the monotony of my silent existence. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing up the spiral stone staircase. Not the shuffling, dutiful tread of the guard. This was a sound of absolute authority. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and cold mountain air. My heart seized in my chest. Him. The heavy iron key turned in the lock, the sound deafening in the silence. The door swung inward, and King Darius filled the frame. He was not dressed for court or ceremony. He wore simple black breeches and a dark tunic, his scarred face illuminated by the single candle flickering on my table. He looked even larger, more formidable, in the confines of the small room. He stepped inside, and the space shrank, the air crackling with his raw, untamed power. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing us in together. He did not speak. He simply stood there, his obsidian eyes sweeping over the stark room, over my pathetic, huddled form on the bed. His gaze was intense, analytical, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. I could feel my wolf, my pathetic, dying wolf, stir for the first time in days. It whimpered, a low instinctual sound of submission and terror before a superior, dominant force. I scrambled to my feet, my back pressing against the cold, damp stone of the wall. My muteness, once a simple fact of my existence, was now a physical barrier. I wanted to scream at him, to demand why he was here, to curse him for my ruin. But no words came. He took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving mine. The scent of him was overwhelming, pine, storm, and a dark, musky undertow that spoke of his wolf. It was a scent that should have been terrifying, but a traitorous part of me, the part that had been raised to be his mate, found it grounding. It was like hearing the first rumble of thunder after a lifetime of silence. "You are a complication," he finally said, his voice a low growl that seemed to be pulled from the very depths of the earth. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of fact. He stopped just out of arm's reach, his presence a suffocating weight. His gaze dropped to my throat, to the place his mark should have been. A muscle in his scarred jaw twitched. "The elders whisper," he continued, his eyes still fixed on my neck. "They say the moon weeps, that the pack's spirit is fractured. They say it is because of you, because the prophecy remains unfulfilled." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Unfulfilled? He was the one who had shattered it. As if he could read my thoughts, his eyes snapped back to mine, a flicker of dark fire in their depths. "Do not mistake my meaning. Leandra is my Luna. The bond is absolute. But your existence, it creates a dissonance, an echo. Echo. That word again, the name he had given me. I was not a person, just the fading sound of a promise he refused to acknowledge. "I came here to see it for myself," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He took another step, closing the distance between us. I was trapped, pinned between the unyielding stone wall and the force of his will. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. So close I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way the silver scar tissue pulled at his skin. He slowly raised a hand. It was large, calloused, a warrior's hand. I flinched, expecting a blow, a dismissal, but his touch, when it came, was shockingly gentle. His fingertips, rough and warm, brushed against the sensitive skin of my neck. A jolt, white-hot and electric, shot through me. It was like lightning striking a dead tree, and for a breathtaking instant, I felt the sap rise. My wolf, my dormant, dying wolf, surged forward with a desperate, howling need. It was a raw, primal recognition, a soul-deep cry of mate. Darius recoiled as if he'd been burned, snatching his hand back. A guttural snarl was ripped from his throat, low and savage. His eyes widened, the black pupils dilating until they almost eclipsed the iris. He was staring at his own hand, then back at me, his expression a maelstrom of shock, fury, and disbelief. "What was that?" he breathed, his voice ragged. I couldn't answer. I was shaking, my body thrumming with an energy I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. The ghost of his touch was a brand on my skin, and the air between us shimmered with a tension so thick it was almost visible. The phantom limb of the prophesied bond had just flexed, and we had both felt it. "This is not possible," he growled, pacing the small room like a caged panther. "The mark is on Leandra. The bond is with her." He stopped, turning to face me, his face a mask of controlled fury. "What are you? What magic is this?" He saw the accusation in my eyes, the silent way I pointed the blame back at him, at my sister. His expression darkened further. "You think this was my choice? Or hers? The bond is not a trinket to be given. It is a force of nature. It chose her. It sealed itself before the ceremony that very afternoon, when she brought me my ceremonial wine. A simple touch of our hands, and it ignited. It was done. That afternoon, the pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. While Leandra was brushing my hair, whispering lies of my glorious future, she had already been to the king. She had already sealed my fate. She had orchestrated it all. The rage that had been simmering within me finally boiled over. It burned away the fear, the shame, the silence. I didn't have a voice, but I had a body. I launched myself at him. It was a pathetic, desperate attack. I beat at his chest with my fists, the blows landing with all the impact of rainfall on granite. I was weeping now, hot, silent tears of betrayal and fury streaming down my face. He didn't even brace himself. He simply stood there and let me strike him, his powerful body absorbing the futile expression of my rage. His hands came up, not to harm me, but to capture my wrists. His grip firm but not crushing. He held me still, forcing me to look at him. "This changes nothing," he said, his voice hard, but the storm in his eyes was wilder than ever. He was fighting something, a battle within himself that was fierce and terrifying. "You will remain here. Leandra is the Luna. That is the only truth I will permit." But I saw the lie in his own eyes. I had felt it. He had felt it. The prophecy was not dead. It was a wounded, furious thing, and its echo was growing louder with every beat of our hearts in this tiny stone room. He released me abruptly, turning his back as if he couldn't bear to look at me a moment longer. He strode to the door, his movements stiff, controlled. With his hand on the iron latch, he paused. "Do not mistake this for sentiment," he said, his back still to me. "You are a threat to the stability of my pack. A loose thread in the tapestry, and I will deal with you." The door slammed shut, the key turned, and he was gone. But his scent lingered, the scent of storms and pine, and the electric charge of what had passed between us still hung in the air. He had come to extinguish an echo, but instead, he had fanned a spark into a flame. And as I slid down the cold stone wall, my body still trembling from his touch, I knew that this was not the end. This was the beginning of a war. Not for a crown or a prophecy, but for the very soul of the bond that he had so desperately tried to deny. The king was gone, but his presence remained, staining the air of my cell. The room, which had been a tomb of silence and despair, now thrummed with a residual electric energy. His scent, that wild, clean scent of a storm breaking over a pine forest, clung to the damp stones, a ghostly reminder of the moment my entire world had tilted on its axis. My skin still burned where he had touched it. It was not a memory. It was a physical fact, a tingling, living brand on my throat that my own fingertips kept returning to, as if to confirm it was real. For the first time since my humiliation, the despair receded, burned away by the heat of that impossible connection. It was not hope, not yet. It was something far more raw and dangerous. It was certainty. The prophecy was not a lie. The bond, the true bond, was not with Leandra. It was a tangled, half-formed, tormented thing, but it lived between me and the king. He had felt it. His savage denial was proof enough. He was a man fighting a war against his own soul, and I was the battlefield. My wolf, which had been a creature of shadow and whimpers, was now a coiled spring of alertness in the pit of my stomach. It was awake. Hungry, it paced the confines of my mind, sniffing the air, tasting the king's lingering scent, and recognizing it with a deep, cellular knowledge that defied logic and law. Mate! The word was no longer a lament, but a quiet, simmering declaration. This newfound clarity gave me strength. I was no longer Arden the rejected, the echo. I was Arden, the keeper of a truth so volatile it could shatter a throne. My imprisonment was no longer a punishment for a crime I didn't commit. It was a strategic move by a king terrified of an inconvenient truth. He had locked me away not because I was nothing, but because I was everything he was trying to deny. Several more days passed. The guards who brought my food now refused to meet my eyes, their movements quicker, more furtive. They could feel the change in the air around me, the shift from pathetic sorrow to a quiet, unnerving intensity. They could smell the king's scent clinging to me, a mark more potent than any silver scar. Then, one afternoon, the lock on my door turned at an unexpected hour. It wasn't the guard's heavy, rhythmic tread. It was a lighter, softer footstep. A scent preceded her, rolling into my cell like a perfumed fog. Cloying night jasmine, so sweet it was sickening. Lyandra stood in the doorway, a vision of regal splendor that was a deliberate cruelty in the squalor of my cell. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that shimmered like a serpent's skin in the dim light. Jewels glittered at her throat and in her perfectly coiled hair. She was the picture of the cherished Luna, the beloved queen, and on her neck, the silver mark pulsed with a soft, steady light. "Sister," she said, her voice a silken purr. She glided into the room, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving us in the charged silence. I begged him to let me see you. I told him your heart must be breaking, all alone up here. She surveyed the room, her nose wrinkling in theatrical distaste. "This is no place for a daughter of Velcarin. I will speak to Darius. A king should be merciful. Perhaps a nice cottage at the edge of the territory, where you can live out your days in peace." Her words were honey, but the meaning was pure venom. Exile, obscurity, a slow social death. I remained silent, watching her from my seat on the edge of the cot. I let her talk, let her weave her web of false concern. My new sharp senses were analyzing her, peeling back the layers of her performance. She smelled of jasmine and silk and expensive oils. And beneath it all, she smelled of the king. His scent was on her, a faint layer of pine and ozone, a claim, proof of her victory. "He is a difficult man, Arden, Paikok." She continued, moving closer, her silk gown whispering against the stone floor. "So burdened. The pack elders still trouble him with whispers of your prophecy. It complicates things. It makes it harder for the pack to fully accept me, to accept our bond." She sighed, a delicate, tragic sound. "It would be so much easier for everyone if you would simply fade." She was now only a few feet away. She reached out a hand as if to comfort me, to touch my cheek. "Don't you see? Your existence is a constant reminder of what should have been, but wasn't. It hurts him, it hurts me, it hurts the pack." My wolf snarled, a low, guttural sound in my mind. The superficial scent of the king on her was an offense, a lie. It was like a cheap perfume meant to mimic a priceless fragrance. And as she drew closer still, my senses, now painfully acute, detected something else, something hidden beneath the jasmine, beneath the faint, stolen scent of the king. It was a bitter, metallic smell, a scent of dried herbs and something earthy, like freshly turned grave soil. It was faint, almost undetectable, but to my reawakened wolf, it was as loud as a scream. I knew that smell. It was moonshade, a rare forbidden herb used by hedge witches for binding rituals, rituals that could manipulate, twist, and sometimes mimic the sacred bonds of the pack. It was a poison to the soul, a heresy of the highest order. The world sharpened into crystalline focus. The bond hadn't chosen her. She had forced it. She had used moonshade. She had dosed the king's ceremonial wine, creating an artificial surge of bonding energy, a magical forgery so perfect it had fooled his own powerful senses, forcing the mark to settle on her skin. It wasn't a bond, it was a brand forged in deceit. That was why the king was in such turmoil. His soul knew the truth, even if his mind did not. His wolf was raging against the false claim on his body, while yearning for the true one prophesied for him. He wasn't a traitor. He was a victim, ensnared in the same trap as I was. I looked at Lyandra, truly looked at her for the first time. I saw past the beautiful, concerned sister, and saw the cold, ambitious creature beneath. I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes when she saw the change in my expression. My despair was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty that terrified her. My silence was no longer the silence of a broken victim. It was the silence of a judge. I slowly lifted my hand and pointed, not at her face, but at the silver mark on her neck. Then I wrinkled my nose in disgust. It was a small gesture, but it struck her with the force of a physical blow. her mask of sympathy shattered, disintegrating into dust. The warmth fled from her eyes, replaced by a chilling reptilian coldness. The corner of her perfect mouth curled into a snarl that was all the more terrifying for its lack of sound. She knew that I knew. "You always were the clever one, Arden," she hissed, her voice losing its silken edge, becoming sharp and brittle as glass. "But cleverness is no substitute for power. I have the mark. I have the king. I have the throne. And what do you have? This damp, forgotten room. You are an echo in a stone tower. No one will ever believe you." She took a step back, her hand instinctively going to the mark on her neck, as if to shield it from my knowing gaze. The mark itself seemed to flicker, its silver light momentarily dimming, as if in response to the lie being exposed. "He will never be yours," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "I will give him heirs, strong alpha heirs. And you and your barren womb and your pathetic silent wolf will be nothing but a footnote in our story. A cautionary tale told to frightened, disobedient pups." She turned and swept toward the door, her emerald gown now looking like the skin of a molting snake. She paused with her hand on the latch, turning to give me one last look. The triumph had returned to her eyes, but it was now laced with a new sharp edge of murderous intent. "Be careful, sister," she whispered, the threat hanging in the air like poison smoke. "An echo is a fragile thing. It can be silenced, permanently." The door slammed shut, the key turned, and I was alone once more. But everything had changed. I was no longer a prisoner mourning a lost life. I was a woman who held the truth, a truth that could either set me free or become my death warrant. Lyandra had not come to comfort me or to banish me. She had come to confirm her victory, and in doing so had handed me the one weapon that could bring her entire world crashing down. The scent of moonshade haunted me. It was a phantom, clinging to the edges of my memory, a constant reminder of Lyandra's treachery. My prison, once a symbol of my disgrace, was now a crucible. The fire of my rage was forging something new within me, not just a desire for justice, but a steely, cold resolve. I was no longer grieving a stolen destiny. I was planning to reclaim it. My wolf, fully awake now, was a restless predator. It paced the cage of my ribs, its hunger no longer for the pack's acceptance, but for vengeance. It yearned for the king, not with the soft longing of a prophesied mate, but with the fierce, possessive need of a soul that has been wronged. He is ours. She stole him. He must know the truth. The thought was a constant, drumming refrain in my mind. But how? Lyandra was right. I was a voiceless echo in a tower. My word against that of the Luna, who bore the Alpha King's mark, was less than dust in the wind. I needed proof. Tangible, undeniable proof that would shatter the illusion she had so carefully constructed. Days turned into a week. A routine settled in, the silent delivery of my food, the endless pacing, the constant turning of the problem in my mind. The world outside my narrow window shifted. The moon, which had been a slender sliver on the night of the king's visit, waxed, growing fat and heavy in the sky. A palpable tension began to seep into the castle, a strange, restless energy that I could feel even in my isolation. The guards grew more agitated, their movements jerky, their scents sharp with anxiety. I recognized the feeling. It was the precursor to the blood moon. The blood moon was a rare celestial event, a time when the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds thinned. For our kind, it was a night of immense power and immense danger. Bonds were tested, ancient magic stirred, and the wolf within every shifter raged closer to the surface. It was a time of judgment, when truths hidden in shadow were often dragged, screaming, into the crimson light. And it was on the eve of the blood moon that my chance came. The usual guard was replaced by a younger, less experienced wolf named Kyle. I knew him from my childhood. He was a distant cousin, a boy who had always looked at me with a kind of gentle, pitying awe. His scent was not the hostile, closed-off scent of the others. It was a confused mix of duty, fear, and a lingering, resentful loyalty to the memory of who I was supposed to be. When he slid the food tray through the slot at the bottom of the door, his hand lingered for a fraction of a second too long. I knelt down, my face close to the opening. I could not speak, but I could act. I pressed my palm flat against the cold stone floor, then looked up, meeting his eyes through the narrow gap. I held his gaze, channeling every ounce of desperation, every shred of the Velcro authority I still possessed, into that single look. Then slowly I traced a single looping symbol in the dust on the floor. It was the old rune for parley, a sacred request for a private audience that no Velcorin could legally deny from another. It was a rite so ancient, so deeply ingrained in our laws, that it had been all but forgotten. Kael's eyes widened. He knew the rune. We had learned them together in the tutelage of Elder Theron. He snatched his hand back as if burned, his scent flooding with panic. To deny the request was a grave offense. To grant it to me, the disgraced Echo, was an act of treason against his king. He hesitated for a long moment, his inner conflict a palpable thing. Then, with a shaky hand, he slid the heavy iron key into the lock. He didn't open the door fully, just a crack. "Lady Ardyn," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What are you doing? This is my life if they find out." I pushed a small torn piece of my wool shift through the crack. On it, I had used a loose thread and a drop of my own blood, from a pricked finger to painstakingly stitched 2 words. Moonshade, Luna. He stared at the scrap of cloth, his face paling in the torchlight. Moonshade was not just forbidden. It was a dark magic, a name whispered in horror stories. To connect it to the Luna was an accusation of the highest, most dangerous order. "This is madness," he breathed, but his eyes were filled with a dawning horror. He, like everyone else, had felt the wrongness since the claiming night, the dissonance in the pack's spirit. I had just given that wrongness a name. "I need to see Elder Theron," I conveyed through urgent gestures, pointing to myself, then making the symbol for the Elder's authority, a crooked staff. "Before moonrise, it is a matter of the king's soul." The weight of my silent plea, of the accusation on that scrap of cloth, was too much for his conflicted conscience. With a low groan of terrified resignation, he nodded. "The Elder is overseeing the preparations for the Blood Moon rite in the old crypts. The guards are changing shifts in an hour. Be ready." The hour was the longest of my life. When Kael finally returned, he thrust a dark, hooded cloak at me. "Do not let anyone see your face," he whispered, his own face slick with sweat. We moved through the castle like ghosts. The halls, usually bustling with pack members, were eerily quiet, most having already gathered at the ceremonial grounds in preparation for the dangerous night ahead. We stuck to servant passages and shadowed corridors, Kael's terror a sharp, acrid scent that made my own nerves sing. The air grew colder, damper, as we descended into the stone bowels of the castle. The scent of dust, old bones, and burning ceremonial herbs grew stronger. We reached the heavy oak door of the crypts, and Kael flattened himself against the wall, his duty done. I was on my own. I slipped inside. The crypt was a vast, cavernous space, the tombs of 100 Velcorin alphas lining the walls. In the center, Elder Theron stood before a massive stone altar, his back to me, chanting in the old tongue. The air was thick with power, the crimson light of the rising blood moon slanting through a high, grated window, and painting the scene in shades of rust and wine. "Elder," I tried to say, but only a desperate breath escaped my lips. He stiffened but did not turn. "I know you are there, Ardyn. I can feel your spirit. It is louder than it has ever been. Kael was a fool to bring you here. The king will have his hide." I stepped forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled a small dry leaf from the pocket of the cloak. It was a single withered moonshade leaf I had found growing in a crack in my tower wall. A final, damning piece of evidence. I placed it on the edge of the altar. Theron finally turned. His ancient eyes fell upon the leaf, and a deep, shuddering sigh escaped his lips. He didn't look surprised. He looked weary, as if he had been expecting this revelation, dreading it. I suspected, he rasped, his gaze lifting to meet mine. The bond felt hollow, forced. It has the shape of truth, but not the soul. He picked up the leaf, his fingers trembling slightly. To do this, to poison a sacred bond, it is a blasphemy that will bring a curse upon us all. The blood moon will not be kind tonight. It is a mirror, and it will show the king the truth of what festers in his soul. As if his words were an incantation, a guttural roar of pure animalistic agony echoed from the courtyard above. It was a sound of torment, of a soul being ripped in two. It was the king's voice. He feels it, Theron whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The moon is showing him the lie. Go to him. It is not the prophecy that commands this child. It is the truth. Only you can anchor him now before the false bond tears his wolf apart. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran from the crypts, my borrowed cloak flying behind me. The main courtyard was a scene of chaos. The blood moon was now high in the sky, a malevolent crimson eye that bathed everything in a terrifying light. The pack was in a state of agitation, their wolves fighting for control, their eyes glowing. And in the center of them all was Darius. He was on his knees, his hands clawing at the stone ground, his body convulsing. A low, continuous snarl of pain was being ripped from his throat. His shirt was torn, and across his back the muscles were writhing, fighting a premature, violent shift. Lyandra was beside him, her hands on his shoulders, her face a mask of panic. "Darius, my love, fight it. Anchor yourself to me." "To our bond," she cried, her voice shrill with desperation. But her touch was like poison to him. Every time she made contact, he roared in greater agony, recoiling from her. The silver mark on her neck was no longer glowing with a gentle light. It was flickering violently, spasming like a dying thing, and its light was a sickly, corrupted silver green. The blood moon was exposing it for the fraud it was. "He rejects the bond," someone shouted. "The Luna, she is poison to him." The pack was turning, their confusion and fear curdling into suspicion as they stared at Lyandra and her flickering false mark. I pushed my way through the terrified crowd, my hood falling back, revealing my face. A collective gasp went through the pack as they saw me. The echo from the tower, here in the heart of their chaos. Darius's head snapped up, his eyes no longer obsidian black, but glowing with the molten gold of his wolf, found mine across the courtyard. The snarl in his throat died, replaced by a low, questioning growl. His torment eased for a fraction of a second. His gaze locked on me. He saw me, and in the depths of his pained, feral eyes, I saw a flicker of recognition, of sanity, of home. "Anchor him," Theron's words echoed in my mind. Lyandra saw the shift in his attention. She saw the way his entire being strained toward me. Pure, undiluted hatred twisted her beautiful features into something hideous. "No!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He is mine!" She launched herself at me, her nails sharpened into claws, her intent murderous, but she never reached me. With a final, soul-shattering roar that was a mix of agony and liberation, Darius's control broke. He threw his head back and the shift took him, not with the fluid grace of a willing change, but with the violent, explosive force of a dam breaking. Bones snapped and reformed with sickening cracks. His body contorted, expanding, fur sprouting from his skin. But it was not his normal wolf that emerged. Under the damning light of the blood moon and the poison of the false bond, the beast that rose from the stone courtyard was a nightmare. Larger than any wolf I had ever seen, its fur the color of shadow, its eyes burning with crimson rage. It was a creature of pure, uncontrolled id, his pain and betrayal given monstrous form. And its first act, as Lyandra stared in horror, was to turn its terrifying, blood-red gaze not on me, but on the woman who had broken him. The beast opened its massive jaws and let out a roar of judgment that promised only one thing: retribution. The creature that wore the king's soul was a force of nature unleashed. It was rage and agony given flesh and fur, a beast born from a poisoned bond, baptized in the crimson light of the blood moon. The pack, which seconds before had been a roiling sea of anxiety, was now frozen, a forest of statues carved from terror. The primal authority radiating from the monstrous wolf was absolute, pinning every lesser wolf in place with its sheer, suffocating power. Leandra's shriek of hatred died in her throat, replaced by a choked gasp of pure, animalistic fear. The beautiful, treacherous Luna was gone. In her place was a woman staring her own damnation in the face. The beast took a step toward her, the ground trembling with the weight of its paws. Each claw was the length of a dagger. Its lips, curled back from teeth like sharpened obsidian, dripped with saliva that sizzled on the cold stones. Its burning red eyes were locked on her, and in them there was no sign of the man, no hint of the king. There was only the raw, undiluted fury of a betrayed wolf. It knew. On some deep, instinctual level, the beast knew she was the source of its torment. The scent of her deceit, the lie of the moonshade, was a stench that drove it to a killing madness. "Darius, it's me, Leandra, your mate," she cried, her voice thin and reedy, a pathetic plea against a hurricane. She stumbled backward, tripping over the hem of her own fine gown. The beast lowered its head, a low guttural growl rumbling up from its massive chest. The sound was not a warning, it was a promise. It stalked toward her, slow, deliberate, savoring the terror that poured from her like a fragrance. I stood frozen, not by the beast's power, but by a horrifying, paralyzing choice. Part of me, the part that had wept in the tower, that had endured the humiliation and the loneliness, wanted this. It wanted to see her pay. It wanted to watch the beast exact the bloody justice she so richly deserved. It would be a neat, tidy end to my suffering. But another part, the part that still held the echo of the prophecy, saw the truth. This was not justice. This was madness. The creature was not just Darius's wolf. It was his pain. If he killed her in this state, driven by the poison and the rage, the man might never find his way back. The scarred king would be lost forever, consumed by the monster his mate's betrayal had created. The prophecy spoke of soothing his rage, not watching it consume him, anchor him. Elder Theron's voice was a whisper in the storm of my mind. While the beast's attention was wholly focused on Leandra, I began to move. I did not run. I did not make any sudden gestures. I walked, my steps measured and calm, into the circle of terror the beast had created around itself. The pack elders gasped, one of them whispering my name like a prayer or a curse. I moved into the beast's peripheral vision. Its massive head turned, the motion slow, fluid, lethal. Those terrifying blood-red eyes left Leandra and settled on me. The deep growl in its chest intensified, the vibrations rattling my own bones. It saw me not as an anchor, but as a new target, a new complication in its red-tinted world of pain. I stopped about 10 feet from it. The air was thick with its scent, ozone, blood, and a deep, underlying musk of profound suffering. I could feel the heat rolling off its shadowed fur. I did not bow my head in submission. I did not show fear, even though my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I simply stood, and I met its gaze. My own pathetic wolf, the flickering ember, was screaming in terror. It wanted to flee, to curl up and die. But I held it down. I pushed past my own fear, reaching for something deeper. I reached for the truth of the prophecy, for the phantom connection I had felt in the tower. I focused on the memory of his touch on my skin, that jolt of pure, undeniable recognition. Darius, I thought, focusing all my will, all my soul, into the single word. Look at me, see me, not the echo, not the prophecy. Me, Arden. The beast tilted its head. A flicker of something that was not rage crossed its demonic features. Confusion. A momentary lapse in its bloodlust. It took a hesitant step toward me, away from Leandra, its growl softening into a low, questioning rumble. Leandra saw her chance. Scrambling to her feet, her face a mask of crazed desperation. She began to back away toward the castle doors. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Go to her, the curse, let it take you both." But the beast was no longer interested in her. Its entire world had narrowed to me. It took another step and another until it stood directly before me, its massive head level with my own. Its shadow engulfed me. I could feel its hot breath on my face, a furnace blast that smelled of the wild and of its inner torment. One snap of those jaws would sever my head from my body. I held my ground. I slowly, deliberately raised my hand. The pack held its collective breath. I could hear Elder Theron chanting softly, his voice a thread of ancient power weaving through the tension. My trembling fingers made contact with the coarse fur between its eyes, right above its massive snout. The fur was hot, almost feverish, and thrumming with a violent, chaotic energy. The beast flinched, a low snarl ripping from its throat. Its muscles tensed, coiling to strike. I did not pull back. I pressed my palm flat against its head, closing my eyes. I shut out the sight of the monster, the terrified pack, the bleeding moon. I focused everything I was on that single point of contact. I poured not pity, not love, not forgiveness, but a simple, unwavering sense of belonging through my touch. "I am here," I projected, my thoughts a silent stream of energy flowing from my soul into his. "You are not alone in this pain. The lie has broken you, but the truth can remake you. Come back. Come back from the rage. Find me." A shudder racked the beast's massive frame. A low, keening whine escaped its throat. A sound of such profound agony and confusion it tore at my heart. The crimson fire in its eyes began to flicker, and for a split second, I saw a flash of molten gold within the red. The man was in there. He was fighting, but the false bond was a tenacious poison. On Lyandra's neck, the corrupted mark flared with a final, desperate burst of power. A wave of nauseating energy washed over the beast, and it roared, shaking its head violently, trying to dislodge my touch, trying to succumb to the madness again. It was too strong, the pain was too deep. I wasn't enough. "The bond!" Elder Theron's voice shouted, cutting through my concentration. "The brand must be broken. It is the only way." My eyes snapped open. I knew what he meant. The false mark on Lyandra was an anchor for this madness. As long as it existed, it would continue to poison him, to fuel the monster. It had to be destroyed. The beast, reeling from the fresh wave of pain, staggered back, its red gaze once more unfocused and wild. It had forgotten me. Its attention was now snapping between the pack, the castle, the moon, a caged animal looking for an escape or a victim. I turned and saw Leandra. She had almost reached the shadows of the main gate. She was going to escape. She would hide, and as long as she wore that mark, the king would be lost to this monster forever. There was no time to think. There was only instinct. The dormant, useless wolf inside me surged forward with her, with a strength I had never known. It was not the strength of an alpha, but the desperate, cunning strength of a survivor. My body moved before my mind could object. I ran, not away from the beast, but directly at it. As I passed its shoulder, I leaped, my hands grabbing a fistful of its coarse, dark fur. With a surge of adrenaline, I scrambled onto its back. The beast roared in surprise, bucking and twisting, trying to throw me off. I clung on, my legs wrapped around its massive torso, my face buried in its fur. "Lyandra!" I screamed, and this time a voice came out. It was not my own quiet, broken whisper. It was a raw, primal cry, a sound torn from the throat of my awakened wolf, filled with all the authority of my bloodline and my destiny. "Face your judgment!" The sound of my voice, so shocking and unexpected, seemed to stun the entire courtyard into silence. The beast beneath me stilled for a critical second, and Lyandra, at the gate, turned, her face a mask of disbelief. I urged the beast forward, not with commands, but with a pure, focused projection of will. Her, the source of the pain, end it. The monster seemed to understand. With a ground-shaking roar, it bounded across the courtyard, covering the distance in 3 massive strides. It was on her before she could even turn to run. It did not use its teeth or claws. It slammed into her, pinning her against the stone wall with the sheer force of its shoulder. Bones cracked. Lyandra screamed, a thin, sharp sound that was cut off as the air was forced from her lungs. I slid from the beast's back, landing unsteadily on my feet. Lyandra was slumped against the wall, conscious but broken, her eyes wide with terror. The false mark on her neck was pulsing erratically, a venomous, sickly green. "It is not his to break," I said, my voice hoarse but clear, speaking to the beast, to the man inside. "It is mine." I reached out and placed my hand over the corrupted mark on my sister's neck. It was cold, unnaturally so, like a piece of dead flesh. I closed my eyes and did not draw on strength or magic. I drew on the truth. I drew on the legitimacy of my own stolen bond, the one prophesied in my blood and soul. "You are a lie," I whispered, my words for the mark itself. "You have no power here. You are broken." Under my palm, the mark flared with a final, agonizing intensity. Lyandra screamed again, a true scream of pain this time. A smell like ozone and burnt hair filled the air. Then, with a faint crackling sound, the light died. The silver-green glow vanished, leaving behind only an angry red welt on her skin. The brand was broken. The false bond was unraveled. A collective gasp went through the pack as they felt the spiritual shift. The dissonant note that had plagued them for weeks was gone. The air cleared, clean and sharp. Behind me, a terrible, drawn-out groan of pain and release echoed through the courtyard. I turned. The monstrous beast was convulsing, shrinking, the shadows seeming to slough off its body like a shed skin. The crimson rage faded from its eyes, replaced by the deep, molten gold of the true alpha wolf. The transformation reversed itself in a wave of cracking bones and shifting flesh. And when it was over, it was not a monster that lay panting on the cold stones. It was Darius, naked, human, and horrifically scarred, but himself. He pushed himself onto his elbows, his chest heaving, his obsidian eyes, clear and sane for the first time, finding mine. He stared at me, at the woman who had a voice, the woman who had ridden the monster, the woman who had broken the curse. And in his eyes, I saw the dawn of a terrifying, beautiful, and undeniable truth. The silence that followed the breaking of the bond was heavier than any scream. It was a vacuum, filled only by the ragged sound of the king's breathing and the soft whimpering cries of Lyandra, slumped and broken against the wall. The blood moon still hung in the sky, but its malevolent power seemed to have been spent, its crimson light now bearing witness rather than inciting madness. The pack remained frozen, their eyes wide, shifting from the naked human form of their king to my sister's pathetic figure, and finally to me. I was no longer the echo. I was no longer the disgraced prophecy. In their eyes, I saw a dawning, fearful respect. I had faced the monster, spoken with a voice they'd never heard, and single-handedly unraveled the dark magic that had held their alpha captive. I had become something new, something they didn't yet have a name for. Darius pushed himself to a sitting position. His body was covered in a sheen of sweat, the muscles in his back and shoulders trembling with exhaustion. His gaze was fixed on me, an intense, penetrating stare that stripped away every defense I had. He wasn't looking at me as a complication or a threat. He was looking at me as if seeing me for the first time, as if he had been blind and could now suddenly see the sun. The storm in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, unnerving calm, like the quiet heart of a hurricane. Elder Theron was the first to move. He shuffled forward, his ancient face a mask of awe, and draped his own ceremonial cloak over the king's broad shoulders. "My king," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. Darius didn't seem to hear him. His focus was entirely on me. "Ardyn," he said, "my name." He spoke it not as a title or a label, but as a discovery. It was a low, rough sound, full of shattered pain and a fragile emerging wonder. My own name, spoken by him with such raw clarity, sent a shiver through me. The voice I had found was a stranger in my own throat, and I didn't know if I could command it again. Guards, their paralysis finally broken, moved to secure Leandra. She offered no resistance. Her ambition shattered along with her bones and her false bond. As they lifted her, her pain-filled eyes met mine. There was no hatred left in them, only a hollow, echoing emptiness. She had gambled everything on a lie, and she had lost in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Her fate was sealed, and we both knew it. The pack began to stir, the whispers starting again. But this time they were not whispers of scorn directed at me. They were hushed, wondering murmurs. Her voice. She commanded the beast. The prophecy. It wasn't broken, it was waiting. Darius finally tore his gaze from me and rose to his feet, pulling the elder's cloak around him. He was unsteady, but his regal bearing returned with an act of sheer will. He was the king again, not the monster. He surveyed his pack, his expression grim. "You have all borne witness to a great treachery," his voice boomed, silencing the whispers instantly. It was the voice of command, of absolute authority. A sacred right was defiled. Your king was ensnared by dark magic. My former mate, he spoke the word with ice and venom, will be judged according to the oldest laws. Her life is forfeit. He turned to the guards holding Leandra. Take her to the dungeons. She will await the dawn. It was a death sentence. His gaze swept the crowd again, and then, inevitably, it returned to me. He took a step in my direction, and the entire pack seemed to hold its breath. He walked until he stood before me, so close that the heat from his body washed over me, chasing away the night's chill. The scent of him was different now. The storm was still there, the pine, the wildness, but the acrid undertone of pain and conflict was gone, replaced by something clean and clear and focused entirely on me. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment in the air between us, as if asking a silent permission. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. His calloused fingers, so different from our first, explosive contact in the tower, gently cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a gesture of profound tenderness that seemed entirely at odds with the fearsome warrior king. You saved me, he murmured, his voice low, for my ears only. You saved me from myself. I saved the pack, I whispered back, my own voice surprising me with its steadiness. A faint smile, the first I had ever seen, touched the corner of his lips, not quite reaching his eyes. No, the pack would have been saved by my death. You saved me. He looked into my eyes, and I saw the endless, starless night I had seen on the claiming stone. But it was no longer a void. It was a sky waiting for its moon, its stars. He was searching for something, asking a question he didn't yet know how to put into words. The prophecy, it hung in the air between us, an unspoken truth, a destiny interrupted and now, perhaps, ready to resume. The pack felt it. The elders felt it. The very air seemed to crackle with the inevitability of it. He was the scarred king. I was the one meant to soothe his rage. I had just done so, in the most literal and terrifying way imaginable. But something in me recoiled from the neat, tidy conclusion. The path here had not been one of fated love. It had been paved with betrayal, humiliation, and terror. I was not the same gentle, hopeful girl who had stood on the claiming stone. The tower, the loneliness, the confrontation with Leandra, riding the monster, they had forged me into someone else. Someone harder. Someone who would not be a passive fulfillment of a prophecy. As if sensing my hesitation, his expression shifted. The tenderness was still there, but it was now underscored with a primal uncertainty, a fear I never would have thought him capable of. Ardyn, he began, his voice rough with emotion, the bond, the real one. It was you. It was always you. My wolf knew it from the moment I saw you on that stone. It fought the moonshade. It fought her scent. It fought everything to get to you. The prophecy. The prophecy is just words spoken by a dead woman, I interrupted, my own boldness shocking me. Words do not bleed. Words do not scream in a locked tower. Words did not face you when you were a monster. His hand tightened slightly on my jaw, his thumb stilling. He wasn't angry. He was listening, truly listening. I am not a balm for your rage, Darius, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I am not a remedy for your scars. That is not what a mate is. A mate is an equal, a partner, a true north to keep you centered, not a bandage to cover your wounds. The silence stretched. He searched my face, his dark eyes tracing every line, every feature, as if memorizing a map. He saw the new strength there, the iron in my spine that hadn't existed before. He saw that I would not be claimed as a prize at the end of a trial. I had to be chosen, as myself. Arden, not as a prophecy. He slowly dropped his hand, a gesture of profound respect. He took a half step back, creating a space between us that was not a distance of rejection, but one of consideration. Then choose on, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying across the entire courtyard. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. A king who had never asked for anything was asking for everything. He was laying his power, his pack, his very soul at my feet, not as a conquest, but as an offering. He was giving me the choice that had been stolen from me, the choice that Lyandra had tried to subvert, the choice to accept my destiny or to forge a new one. I looked at him, at this terrifying, powerful, broken man who was finally truly seeing me. I looked past him, at the faces of the pack, their expressions a mixture of hope and fear, waiting for my decision. This was my moment. Not the claiming stone under a placid full moon, but here, in the aftermath of chaos, under a blood-red sky with the scent of broken magic still in the air. This was the true ceremony. My wolf, strong and clear within me now, rose up not with a whimper or a snarl, but with a calm, steady certainty. It recognized its other half, not as a king or a prophecy, but as the male who was its perfect, balancing opposite, the storm to its calm, the fire to its ice. I took a step forward, closing the space he had created. I raised my own hand and, for the first time, I initiated the touch. I laid my palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. I could feel the powerful, steady beat beneath my hand. It was the rhythm of a new beginning. My place was never on the claiming stone, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that felt like truth itself. It was always here, in the heart of the storm, beside you. A tremor went through him, a deep, shuddering release of a tension he had carried for a lifetime. The scarred king, the lonely alpha, the betrayed man, finally let his guard down. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch like a man dying of thirst finding water. He did not speak. He didn't need to. In that moment, a bond far more powerful than any forced mark or ancient prophecy began to weave itself between us. It was not a bond of silver fire and magic, but one forged in blood and truth, in a choice freely made in the light of the dying moon. 3 moons had waxed and waned since the night of blood and judgment. The chill of that cursed autumn had given way to the first tentative breaths of spring. The scent of thawing earth and damp, budding life rose from the valley below the castle, a fragrance of promise that worked to cleanse the lingering stain of old magic and betrayal from the stones. From the high balcony of the king's chambers, I watched the last of the winter snows melt from the jagged northern peaks, the streams flowing down like silver veins on a granite hand. My hand rested on the cold stone of the balustrade, my fingers tracing the carvings of ancient wolves. I was no longer a prisoner looking out a narrow slit of a window. The entire world was spread before me, vast and waiting. My simple gray shift had been replaced by a gown of deep midnight blue, but I wore no jewels. My authority did not come from trinkets. It came from the quiet, steady hum of the pack bond that was now a constant, comforting song in my soul. A song where my own voice was a clear, strong harmony. A warm, solid presence came up behind me. Large hands settled on my waist, and a familiar weight rested against my back as Darius pulled me close, his chin coming to rest on my shoulder. His scent, pine and clean air after a storm, was my home now. It no longer held the sharp, acrid tang of inner conflict. It was calm, centered, and possessive in a way that felt like a shield, not a cage. "You're quiet," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my ear. I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. "I have spent a lifetime being quiet, my king. I am simply enjoying the novelty of choosing it." My voice, once a lost and broken thing, was mine again. It had returned fully in the days after the blood moon, hesitant at first, like a fawn taking its first steps, but growing stronger with each word I shared with him. Now it was as natural to me as breathing. We stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching the changing light. The past was a shadow that walked with us, but it no longer had the power to consume us. "Does the tower still haunt you?" he asked, his gaze following mine to the distant, lonely spire of the widow's tower, which caught the last rays of the setting sun. "It was a prison," I said, turning my head to look at him. His scarred face was no longer just a mask of fierce command. I had learned to read the subtle shifts in his dark eyes, the slight softening of his jaw. I saw the man beneath the monarch. But it was also a crucible. The woman who left that tower was not the girl who entered it. I will not let it haunt me. It will serve as a reminder. "Of your strength," he finished for me, his thumb stroking my side through the soft fabric of my gown. "Of our truth," I corrected gently. He turned me then, his hands framing my face, forcing me to meet his intense gaze. "Lyandra," he said, the name a flat, dead thing between us. The dawn came for her, as the law required. I would not have you hear it from another. I had known it was coming. I felt a pang, not of sorrow for the sister she had become, but for the one I had lost long before that final, terrible night. She was a ghost, a cautionary tale of ambition curdling into poison. "Her choices brought her to that end," I said softly. "May the goddess grant her spirit the peace she never found in life." Darius searched my face, and I knew he was looking for any lingering pain, any shadow of that betrayal. He found none. There was only a quiet acceptance. He nodded, a weight seeming to lift from his own shoulders. He had carried the guilt of her actions, of his own unwitting part in them, and my absolution was the final piece of his healing. "The pack thrives," he said, changing the subject. "They call you Luna Volkserts behind your back, the wolf-hearted queen. They tell the story of how you rode the beast to every new litter of pups. They say you have the spirit of the first Luna in your blood." "And what do you say?" I asked, my heart beating a little faster. "I say the prophecy was a fool," he stated, his voice dropping to a raw, intimate whisper. It spoke of a gentle north wind, of soothing a rage. It was wrong. You did not soothe my rage, Arden. You met it. You faced my storm and became its center. You are not the wind. You are my true north, the point by which my soul navigates. The raw poetry of his words stole my breath. This was the king who had called me an echo, a complication. This was the man who had hidden his heart behind a wall of scars and fury. To hear him speak this way was to witness a miracle. He lowered his head, his forehead resting against mine. The pack was healed. The traitor was gone. The prophecy had found its true meaning, but there was one last thing. I could feel the question thrumming in the air between us, in the way his heart beat against my own. His hand moved from my face, his fingers tracing a slow, deliberate path down my neck, coming to rest in the hollow of my throat, the place that was still bare, the place that had burned with a phantom connection in the tower. "The blood moon forged a truth between us," he murmured, his breath warm on my lips. It shattered the lie, but it was a night of chaos and survival. A true bond, our bond, should not be born of such things. It must be a choice, made in peace, made in clarity. He took a step back, his eyes never leaving mine. I will not claim you as the fulfillment of a prophecy, Arden. I will not mark you as my prize for surviving a curse. I will ask you, here and now, as the man you saved, and the king who would be lost without you. Will you be my Luna? Will you be my mate, my partner, my queen? Will you allow me to seal the bond that my soul has recognized since the beginning? The world fell away. There was no balcony, no kingdom, no pack. There was only this man, his scarred heart laid bare, offering me not a crown, but a partnership. He was giving me everything, and the choice was entirely my own. My own wolf rose up to meet the question, a powerful, joyful surge of certainty. There was no hesitation. There was no doubt. I chose you in the heart of the storm, Darius, I whispered, my hand rising to cup his scarred cheek. And I choose you now, in the calm. A shudder of pure, profound relief went throughout his entire body. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch, a silent oath passing between us. He then led me from the balcony, back into the firelit warmth of our chambers. He did not lead me to the bed, but to the hearth, where the flames danced and cast flickering shadows on the walls. We knelt before the fire, facing each other as if before a sacred altar. Then let it be done, he said, his voice thick with an emotion so deep it was holy. I tilted my head, offering myself to him not in submission, but in trust, in offering. He leaned forward, his own powerful form trembling with the force of his restraint. His lips brushed my skin, a feather-light touch of reverence. I smelled the scent of him, the scent of my home, and then I felt the sharp, brief sting of his canines. It was not a pain of violence, but a pain of becoming. A searing, brilliant silver fire exploded behind my eyes. It was not the burning of a brand, but the igniting of a sun. The bond, the true bond, slammed into place, and in that blinding instant, our souls touched. I saw through his eyes the lonely weight of the crown, the silent agony of his scars, the terror of the beast, and the overwhelming desperate love he felt for me. And he saw through mine, the cold silence of the tower, the sting of betrayal, the fierce, defiant spark that had refused to be extinguished, and the deep, unwavering certainty that he was my other half. When he pulled back, the silver fire did not vanish. It settled, coalescing on my skin, into a mark that mirrored his own, an intricate swirling knot of power, pulsing with a soft, living light. It did not feel like a scar. It felt like a part of me that had always been missing, now finally restored. He touched the fresh mark with a reverent finger, his own eyes shimmering with an unshed emotion. Mine, he whispered, the word of vow. Yours, I answered, my hand covering his, and you, mine. Later, we stood on the balcony again, wrapped in a single cloak against the night air, my mark a warm, steady glow against his shoulder. The moon was a pure, clean silver, and the kingdom below us was peaceful, sleeping under the protection of its true king and queen. The prophecy had been a map, but the journey was our own, and as the first light of a new day crested the northern peaks, king and queen, Alpha and Luna, we faced our dawn together.